Tonight, we step into a part of history that few talk about, but everyone lived through. The daily dance with toilets, or more accurately, the lack of them. Forget marble statues or legendary battles. This is about the moments between meals and monuments, where humanity's most basic needs played out in surprisingly public ways. In this journey, you'll wander through narrow streets that double as open sewers, sit shoulder to shoulder on ancient stone benches, and learn what people wiped with before soft paper was a thing. It's messy, it's human, and oddly enough, it says more about everyday life than any scroll of royal decrees. I'm the candlelight historian, and this is history as it was lived, unforgiving, unfiltered, and brutally real. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these late-night dives into the past. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, relax, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in a world where privacy is more of an urban legend than a right. The idea of locking a bathroom door, or even having a bathroom, is centuries away. The air is already awake before you are, thick with a stew of smoke from last night's fire, the faint temps of animals outside, and the musty smell of unwashed wool blankets. You sit up slowly, careful not to bump your head on the wooden beam overhead, and glance toward the door, which isn't really a door at all, just a wooden plank leaning on its side. If someone needs to relieve themselves, they either step outside into the biting morning air or grab the nearest bucket. Congratulations, you've just discovered the original open-plan bathroom concept. The ground outside is damp and uneven under your feet. Somewhere nearby, you hear a neighbor's goat bleating, and you know what that means. The animal left its own contribution to the ground overnight. It's not just you who has to navigate the daily toilet ritual. Everyone, from the smallest toddler to the oldest grandparent, is part of this ongoing, communal dance. There's a certain grim equality in that. The truth is, ancient life rarely afforded anyone the luxury of privacy. In cities, houses were crammed shoulder to shoulder, with walls so thin that every cough, whisper, or digestive sound was essentially public knowledge. And what about if you lived in the countryside? Your toilet was whatever spot you chose, far enough from the house to avoid offending the kitchen, but close enough that you wouldn't be eaten by wolves while squatting. If you're in a bustling Roman town, things are slightly better, though better is relative. Public latrines stand proudly in certain corners of the city, not tucked away in shame, but built as grand stone chambers with long benches. They don't have walls separating each seat. No, you're expected to sit beside strangers and carry on conversation as though you're just sharing bread and wine. Imagine modern coffee shop chatter, but with a lot more echo and none of the espresso. And the sounds, a symphony of scraping sandals on stone, the gentle trickle of water running underneath if you're lucky enough to be in a Roman facility, and the occasional cough or laugh from the person beside you. The Romans didn't believe in awkward silence here. Instead, they turned bathroom time into a social event. You think small talk in a modern elevator is uncomfortable. Try making eye contact with your neighbor on a communal bench while you both attempt to look dignified. Not that people had much choice. It happened when it happened, and often you shared that moment with others. This casual, shoulder-to-shoulder bathroom culture tells you a lot about ancient daily life. Everything was communal, from meals cooked in shared ovens to laundry done in the same rivers. Personal space was a luxury that no one expected. Even royalty had attendants around at all times, because apparently privacy was for peasants, or maybe no one at all. Of course, not all bathrooms were public. Wealthy families sometimes had private latrines in their homes, complete with stone seats, carved smooth and decorative mosaics on the walls. Imagine relieving yourself while staring at an intricate pattern of dolphins, flowers, or mythological scenes. It's a strange blend of dignity and indignity, as if someone tried to make the most basic human activity feel like an art gallery experience. And honestly, after seeing what most common people had to endure, a little art above your toilet would feel like the height of luxury. The morning routine in an ancient city isn't just about you, though. As soon as people wake, the streets begin to come alive, and by alive, I mean full of smells that could knock over a horse. Buckets of waste get tossed out of windows with a shouted warning that never quite comes in time. The cobblestones glisten with yesterday's rain mixed with other liquids. You step carefully, but there's no avoiding it. This is the scent of civilization in its rawest form. And yet, there's something strangely comforting about how everyone accepts it. There's no pretense, no marketing campaigns promising lavender freshness or pine-scented cleaning solutions. Life is what it is, messy, smelly, and shared. In a way, the ancient toilet situation strips away all illusions of superiority. Whether you're a soldier, a baker, or a merchant, everyone has to deal with the same basic problem. There's a certain honesty in that. As the day begins, you can see people moving through their morning routines with quiet determination. Some head to the communal bathhouse, where they'll scrub themselves clean before starting work. Others will make a quick stop at the public latrine, exchanging greetings with neighbors who are already seated. And then there's the poorer crowd, slipping behind buildings or heading toward the nearest ditch, hoping for a moment of privacy before the streets get crowded. This is where your journey begins, not with kings or warriors, but with the quiet, unglamorous side of daily survival. The side that every historian knows but few talk about because it lacks the cinematic appeal of sword fights and love stories. But if you pay attention, these humble toilets and dirty streets tell you more about ancient life than any heroic legend ever could. Because here's the truth, toilets are where practicality meets culture. They reveal how people lived, what they valued, and how they saw the body. In this video, we're going to walk through centuries of human ingenuity, from wooden buckets to stone benches, from chamber pots to Roman aqueducts, and see how something as simple as waste shaped entire civilizations. So, take another breath. The air might not be fresh, but the story is. The streets greet you like an old friend with bad breath. They are narrow, winding paths of stone and dirt, lined with buildings that lean inward as if gossiping about everyone who passes below. Early morning sunlight filters through the gaps, but it doesn't make the view any prettier. The ground is a patchwork of puddles, some from last night's rain, others from less heavenly sources. Every few steps, there's a pile of something you don't want to identify too closely. Let's just say the streets in ancient cities were not built with pedestrians in mind. They were designed to carry waste away, and they did, in the most literal sense. As you walk, you hear a shout from above, a high, drawn-out cry. A bucket tips from a second-story window, sending its contents splashing onto the street. This is the ancient version of indoor plumbing, gravity. If you were lucky, the person remembered to yell a warning. But even with a warning, no one moves fast enough. You instinctively step aside, but not before catching the faint mist of, let's call it city perfume. The smell here is layered. At the base, there's the ever-present stench of human waste, sharp, sour, and clinging. Mixed into that is the tempts of rotting vegetable scraps, the sweetness of spilled wine that's long since turned to vinegar, and the pungent aroma of animal droppings from the oxen and horses that pull carts down these same paths. It's not just unpleasant, it's constant. After a few hours, your senses dull to it. But that first wave each morning is an unkind reminder of where you are. The streets themselves serve as open sewers, which means everything that doesn't get dumped in a bucket ends up here. In some cities, there are shallow channels running down the middle, intended to carry waste toward rivers or ditches. In theory, this helps. In practice, it just means there's a slow-moving river of brownish sludge weaving through town. When it rains, the whole street becomes a slurry. When it doesn't rain, the sun bakes the smell into something you could probably chew. Walking through this landscape requires strategy. You step on raised stones, dodging the trickier spots like a medieval game of hopscotch. The locals are experts, balancing baskets on their heads while stepping neatly from one dry patch to the next. They don't even glance down. For them, this is normal, just another part of life, like breathing or complaining about taxes. This setup isn't accidental. Cities grew faster than their ability to manage waste. Ancient engineers weren't clueless. They simply had different priorities. Roads were built for trade, for the movement of armies, for processions of dignitaries. As for the waste, it was just part of the background, like the noise of a busy market or the sound of someone hammering iron in a workshop. No one expected the streets to be clean. Sometimes, though, there are attempts at improvement. In parts of Rome, you might see water channels trickling along the sides of the street, carrying some of the mess away. Public workers, often enslaved people, might sweep up the worst of the refuse, but this is more about appearances than hygiene. After all, the concept of germs won't exist for over 1,000 years. What you can't see can't hurt you, right? Well, the rats and fleas might disagree. One odd thing about these streets is how alive they feel. Not just with people, but with creatures that thrive in this environment. Dogs roam freely, tails wagging, snouts sniffing for scraps. Chickens dart between doorways, clucking as if they own the place. And then there are the flies, swarming, buzzing, relentless. They follow the smell like it's their favorite perfume, landing on everything from fresh bread to yesterday's waste. Swatting them away becomes a daily workout. As you move deeper into the city, you start to see how this open sewer system shapes everyday life. Children play on the edges of the street, hopping over puddles and chasing sticks, their laughter carrying over the din of the marketplace. Women wash vegetables in buckets of water that are, hopefully, cleaner than the street itself. Merchants set up their stalls, careful to place their goods just high enough to avoid any splashes from passing carts. It's a delicate balance of commerce and filth. There's a strange charm to it though. The chaos is almost comforting once you accept it. People here have learned to live with their environment, to adapt to the smells and the sounds and the constant clutter. They don't waste time wishing for flush toilets or clean pavements. Such luxuries are beyond imagination. Instead, they focus on getting through the day, on making the best of what they have. Every so often, a public announcement will be made. Someone with a loud voice or a bell warns that waste will be dumped from certain windows. It's a courtesy, though not always an effective one. If you're new to the city, you learn fast. Always look up when you hear shouting. Better yet, walk close to the walls, even if it means brushing against rough stone. The middle of the street is for carts, waste, and the brave. By now, your sandals are already streaked with dirt. You're grateful for them, flimsy as they are, because barefoot walking here would be a nightmare. The ground squelches in certain spots, and in others, it's just sticky. You wonder how anyone keeps their homes clean. The answer is, they don't. The streets follow you inside, clinging to your clothes and your skin. Cleanliness is a luxury, one that most people can't afford. It's no wonder that so many ancient cities had problems with disease. With waste dumped so freely, every rainfall becomes a health hazard, washing who knows what into the water supply. People don't understand the connection between filth and illness, but they do notice patterns. They might blame the gods, or bad air, or evil spirits, but the truth is much simpler. The streets themselves are a breeding ground for trouble. Still, life goes on. People gather in the markets, buying bread and fish and olives, all while sidestepping puddles and holding their noses. Children grow up here, learning the dance of the streets as naturally as learning to walk. To them, this is just home, smells and all. And as you weave your way through these crowded, chaotic paths, you can't help but think, this is the foundation of civilization. Every great empire, every famous city started with streets like this, messy, noisy, and alive with the raw hum of human existence. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and in its own strange way, it's beautiful. The first time you see a Roman latrine, you might not even realize what it is. From a distance, It looks like a row of stone benches with round holes cut into them. No walls, no partitions, no sense of shame. Just a long, open bench and a steady trickle of water flowing underneath. This, apparently, is civilization at work. Welcome to the birth of the communal toilet. There is no quiet knock on the door. No, just a minute from the other side. Here, people simply walk in, take a seat, and do what they need to do. Often, while greeting neighbors or discussing the latest political gossip. It's oddly efficient. Imagine your local coffee shop, but instead of sipping lattes, everyone is. Well, you get the picture. The Romans are proud of their public latrines, and in a way, you can see why. They're usually made from smooth stone, with channels of fresh water running beneath to carry waste away. Some even have decorative mosaics on the walls or floors. Because if you're going to be communal about it, you might as well make it look nice. You might find yourself staring at a colorful tiled dolphin while quietly trying to ignore the stranger sitting 6 inches to your left. Speaking of strangers, the lack of privacy is not a flaw in the Roman mind. It's intentional. Going to the toilet is just another social activity, like going to the baths or visiting the market. There's no taboo here, no whispered jokes about bodily functions. In fact, some historians believe these latrines were places where deals were made, news was exchanged, and friendships were formed. If you think about it, there's something oddly democratic about that. No one, not even a senator, is above the call of nature. Still, the experience is not exactly glamorous. The sounds alone are enough to remind you this is a shared space. Every cough, every shuffle, every splash echoes in the stone chamber. If you're unlucky, you'll sit near someone who has had a little too much garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans seem to put on everything. It's the kind of detail that makes you appreciate the invention of modern exhaust fans. Then there's the cleaning process. Toilet paper hasn't been invented yet, and the Romans have their own unique solution, the tessorium. It's essentially a sponge on a stick, soaked in vinegar or salty water, and shared among everyone in the latrine. Yes, shared. You try not to think about how many people have used it before you, but the thought is impossible to avoid. You find yourself holding the sponge as though it's a rare artifact, wondering if you can just not. And yet, for its time, this setup is considered advanced. The water running beneath the seats is part of a larger system, connected to aqueducts and drainage channels. Waste is carried away rather than left to stew underfoot. Compared to the streets you just walked through, this is practically luxury. You can almost convince yourself that this is progress if you ignore the communal sponge. Some latrines are strategically placed near bathhouses, making it easy to wash up afterward. Others are located in busy parts of the city, ensuring that you'll never have trouble finding company while you go about your business. Privacy, as you've learned, is not part of the design. If anything, there's a sense of shared humanity here. Everyone, rich or poor, eventually ends up on one of these benches. As you sit there, listening to the quiet hum of voices and the faint sound of water trickling below, you realize something. This is a slice of daily life that rarely makes it into history books. When we think of Rome, we picture gleaming temples, grand forums, and chariots thundering through the Circus Maximus. But here, in this humble latrine, is the reality of life. This is where real conversations happen, where neighbors meet, where the empire's grand ideas probably feel a little less important. Of course, not all latrines are created equal. In wealthy households, private toilets are built with the same attention to style as the rest of the villa. They might feature polished marble, intricate mosaics, and even a personal sponge, because nothing says luxury like not having to share. But most people don't live like that. Most people share the bench, the space, and the experience with whoever happens to be there at the same time. And then there's the question of smell. Public latrines are not known for their pleasant aromas. The water flow helps, but not enough. You sit there breathing shallowly, trying to focus on anything other than the sensory assault. Maybe you look at the carvings on the walls, or trace your finger over the smooth stone seat, worn down by centuries of use. It's a strange kind of intimacy to sit where countless others have sat, to share this experience across time. There's a quiet rhythm to it. Someone comes in, greets the group, sits, finishes, and leaves. Another person takes their place. The water keeps flowing, carrying everything away into the unseen channels beneath the city. It's not glamorous, but it works. And for a civilization as vast as Rome, that's no small achievement. As you rise from the bench and step back into the sunlight, the air outside feels fresher, cleaner, almost sweet compared to what you just endured. You glance back at the stone chamber, its rows of holes lined up like silent witnesses to the reality of human life. It's not the kind of monument that makes it into postcards, but in its own way, it's just as important. After all, what could be more universal than this? And as you continue walking, you can't help but wonder, when people look back at our modern bathrooms, centuries from now, what will they think of us? Water, or the lack of it, has always dictated how people handled their most basic needs. Today, you might turn a shiny handle, hear the reassuring rush of water, and watch everything disappear as if by magic. In the ancient world, though, water was a luxury that required clever engineering or sheer luck. Entire civilizations rose and fell depending on how they managed it, and toilets were no exception. If you happen to live in a Roman city, you're in one of the few places where water is both abundant and celebrated. The aqueducts, those beautiful arches stretching across the landscape, bring water into the city from miles away. They feed the fountains, public baths, and yes, the latrines. The gentle flow of water under the stone seats keeps things moving, or at least keeps them from building up into an olfactory nightmare. It's not perfect, but compared to other parts of the world, it's practically cutting edge. The Romans understood something fundamental. A little water makes everything more manageable. The sewers beneath the city, the most famous being the Cloaca Maxima, are marvels of engineering, carrying away waste and rainwater together. When you look at it, you can't help but admire the practicality. They weren't just thinking about today, they were planning for tomorrow, too. For all their flaws, they knew that a city with no drainage system is a city asking for trouble. But not everyone was so lucky. In smaller towns, villages, or rural settlements, water is a scarce and precious resource. A bucket of clean water might be reserved for drinking or cooking, not for washing away yesterday's bucket of waste. If you're far from the reach of an aqueduct, your toilet options get creative. You might dig a pit, cover it with a wooden seat, and hope the rain does its job now and then. Or you might carry your waste to a nearby river, which, yes, people also use for washing and collecting drinking water. Hygiene standards are more a matter of proximity than preference. In some places, particularly in dry climates, people turn to sand or ash instead of water. It sounds strange, but it works well enough to keep things from becoming unbearable. Imagine sprinkling a handful of sand after each use, the way modern cat owners tidy up after their pets. It's not glamorous, but it's efficient. And really, when you're living in a desert, who has water to waste on toilets, you start to realize how deeply water availability shapes daily routines. In cities with advanced plumbing, like Rome or parts of ancient Greece, people gather at public fountains, fill clay jars, and carry water home not just for drinking, but also for cleaning. This changes everything, from how often people bathe to how often they clean their homes. In drier regions, life moves at a slower pace. Bathing might happen once a week or once a month, and freshness is a concept better suited to bread than to people. Still, even with aqueducts and sewers, the Romans didn't quite have flushing as we know it. The water beneath the latrines flows continuously, but it's more about moving things along than whisking them away instantly. It's a slow, steady current that carries waste into the larger drainage systems. Sometimes, someone might pour extra water to help things along, an ancient version of the double flush. And then there's the challenge of keeping that water clean. Aqueducts bring fresh water in, but once it passes through the city, it's not exactly drinkable. People learn to draw water upstream, bathe downstream, and hope they don't mix the two. There's a delicate balance between cleanliness and contamination, and it's a balance that most people walk every single day, whether they realize it or not. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's fascinating how something as simple as water defines civilization. The presence of running water isn't just about convenience, it's a symbol of power, wealth, and progress. A city with water infrastructure can support thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people. A city without it, that's a ticking time bomb. For the average person, though, these grand engineering feats are just part of the background. They don't marvel at the aqueducts every morning the way we might marvel at indoor plumbing. They simply wake up, walk to the nearest fountain, and fill their jars because that's what you do to survive. The toilet, the bucket, the pit, they all depend on how much water you can spare, and for most people, that's not much. There's also an unexpected side effect of this relationship with water. People talk. Public fountains and baths are as much about socializing as they are about staying clean. When you gather at the fountain to collect water, you might chat about the latest market prices, or who's marrying whom, or whether the baker's bread was better yesterday. When you sit in a public bath, scrubbing away the grime of the day, you're also catching up on local news. Water, in this sense, is a social glue. It connects people as much as it cleans them. You start to see the pattern. Where water flows, life thrives. Where it doesn't, people improvise. A Roman latrine with its flowing channel feels almost luxurious compared to a dry pit in a windswept village. And yet, no matter the setting, the goal is the same. Find a way to stay just clean enough to get through the day. As the sun climbs higher, the city around you stirs into full motion. You see a group of women carrying water jars balanced perfectly on their heads, chatting as they go. A young boy runs ahead with a small bucket, splashing his sandals with every step. Somewhere nearby, a public bathhouse is opening its doors, ready for the first round of visitors. Water is life here, and everyone knows it. When you look at your own modern bathroom, with its taps, its endless water supply, its little chrome flush handle, it's easy to forget that this comfort is built on thousands of years of trial and error. It's the legacy of every aqueduct, every clay pipe, every carefully dug channel, and it all started with the simple question, where does the water go? If modern toilet paper feels like a small, humble luxury, that's because it is. For most of human history, people had to get creative with what they had on hand, quite literally. Welcome to the strange, slightly uncomfortable world of ancient toilet tools. The first thing you notice is that there's no neat roll of soft, perforated paper waiting for you. The Romans, ever resourceful, favored the cesspit, a sponge attached to the end of a wooden stick. It sounds practical enough until you remember the communal aspect. Yes, this sponge is shared. Everyone who visits the latrine dips it into a bucket of vinegar or salty water before and after using it. You can't help but stare at it for a moment, trying to decide whether to trust the vinegar's cleaning power or just skip that step altogether. The cesspit is surprisingly effective though. Soft, reusable, and easy to rinse. It does the job, as long as you don't think about who used it 5 minutes before you. Romans were nothing if not efficient. They kept a bucket of water with vinegar or lye near the bench, and the sponge would sit there waiting for the next person. It's not glamorous, but when compared to some of the alternatives, you begin to appreciate its ingenuity. Travel east, and you'll find a very different approach. In parts of China, bamboo sticks wrapped in cloth were common. In Japan, smooth wooden spatulas called chugi were the tool of choice. Over time, these evolved into simpler, disposable versions. They may not have been soft, but they were sturdy, easy to clean, and far less communal. Meanwhile, in colder northern climates, people turned to nature's supply of moss. Think of it as the eco-friendly, compostable option, soft, absorbent, and free. Coastal communities sometimes used seashells, which sounds like the world's least comfortable option, unless you found the perfectly smooth variety. Even so, it makes you cringe just thinking about it. Smooth or not, shells are a far cry from anything we'd call gentle. Other regions relied on leaves, corn cobs, or even handfuls of snow. Yes, snow. It's hard to imagine anything that would wake you up faster than a handful of ice applied to your most sensitive parts. Still, when that's what you have, that's what you use. It's practical, it's plentiful, and it leaves you very, very awake. What's fascinating about these tools is how much they tell you about the people who used them. The tersorium, for example, is perfectly in line with Roman culture, communal, efficient, and tied to their water systems. Bamboo and wooden sticks reflect the resources and craftsmanship of East Asia. Moss and snow speak of a life close to nature, where people make do with whatever the land provides. Each solution is a little window into daily life, a reminder that history isn't just about battles and empires. It's about moments like this, quiet, personal, and universal. Sometimes these tools even carried symbolic meaning. In some ancient cultures, cleaning oneself was linked to purity and respect for the gods. Ritual washing was common, especially before meals or prayers. In others, it was purely practical. No symbolism, no ritual, just a quick and efficient process before getting on with the day. Either way, it's clear that even in ancient times, people cared about staying clean, or at least cleaner than the alternative. Of course, there were those who couldn't be bothered with any of this. The poorest city dwellers, lacking both tools and access to public latrines, sometimes used whatever was at hand: straw, cloth scraps, or even just water from a jar. It's easy to imagine how infections and illnesses spread in these conditions, especially when hygiene was so closely tied to the availability of clean materials. In wealthier homes, things looked a little better. The elite might have private sponges or cloths, washed by servants, a job you would not envy. Some even had fabrics scented with herbs, lavender, rosemary, or mint, which at least made the experience a little more pleasant. If you're rich enough to have someone cleaning up after you, why not make it smell nice? As you hold a tersorium in your hand, you can't help but laugh at how far humanity has come. Or maybe not that far. After all, this is basically the ancient version of a reusable cleaning tool. Modern trends are circling back to reusables now: bamboo paper, fabric wipes, even high-tech bidets. Perhaps the Romans were just ahead of their time. You leave the latrine, glancing once more at the sponge on its stick. Someone else steps in to take your place, dipping it into the bucket with the same casualness you might expect from someone grabbing a towel at the gym. It's just part of life here. No one thinks twice about it. And that's the real lesson of these ancient tools. What feels strange to us today was once as normal as brushing your teeth or tying your shoes. The next time you see a soft roll of toilet paper in a clean bathroom, you might pause for a moment of gratitude, because history has shown that wiping with moss, sticks, or sponges shared by strangers is a humbling experience. And as we continue on this journey, you begin to realize that toilets are never just about waste. They're about culture, resources, and the ingenious, sometimes absurd ways people solve the most human of problems. Night falls, and with it comes the quiet shuffle of feet and the clinking of metal and clay. The streets grow dark, lit only by flickering oil lamps and the faint glow from house fires. Inside cramped homes, people are preparing for bed, but there's one last task to take care of before sleep. Nature doesn't care about convenience, and when it calls in the middle of the night, stepping outside into a pitch-black street filled with questionable puddles is not high on anyone's list of favorite activities. Enter the humble chamber pot. The chamber pot is the unsung hero of ancient and medieval domestic life. Simple, functional, and absolutely vital. It's nothing more than a container, clay, metal, or even wood, tucked discreetly under the bed or in a corner. It's not glamorous, but when you wake in the middle of the night with that familiar urgency, it's the only thing standing between you and an undignified trip to the backyard. You lift the lid, or if there isn't one, you just hope that no one has knocked it over during the day. There's no water to flush, of course. You do what needs doing and quickly cover it again, trying not to breathe too deeply. By morning, someone will take it outside to dispose of the contents. And this is where things get interesting, because chamber pots don't just vanish like modern toilets. They have to be emptied. And where do they go? Into the streets. Imagine the daily ritual. Someone opens a window, gives a loud shout, and tips the pot. If you're standing below at the wrong time, well, that's an unpleasant surprise. It's easy to see why people learned to walk close to the buildings, or to wear cloaks with large hoods. Even in wealthy households, chamber pots are everywhere. Servants empty them, wash them, and put them back in place. The elite might have chamber pots made of bronze or decorated ceramics, which is a little like putting a ribbon on a dustbin. It doesn't make the experience any less smelly. What it does tell you, though, is that even the rich weren't exempt from this part of life. Whether you're a king or a baker, everyone starts and ends the day with the same humble vessel. Public spaces are a different story. If you're out late and nature calls, good luck. Public latrines are often closed at night, and the streets are dangerous after dark. Most people simply find a shadowy spot and hope no one's watching. It's not ideal, but when you live in a time before streetlights and police patrols, discretion is as much about survival as privacy. There's also the problem of smell. Homes are not well ventilated, and if the chamber pot isn't emptied promptly, the air inside becomes oppressive. You can almost taste it when you breathe. Families learn tricks to keep the odor down, sprinkling ashes or herbs inside, covering the pot with cloth, or just emptying it first thing in the morning before breakfast. Still, you get used to it, the same way you get used to smoke from the fire or the smell of unwashed wool. It becomes part of the background. Children, of course, have no concept of discretion. They treat chamber pots like toys, sometimes tipping them over or knocking them about. You can imagine the chaos of a busy household, with half-asleep adults tripping over these pots in the dark. It's not glamorous, but it's life, and it's as close as you'll get to modern convenience before indoor plumbing arrives centuries later. In cities, the morning disposal process is almost ceremonial. You can picture it now, a line of people carrying pots or buckets, heading toward the nearest ditch, river, or just the street outside their homes. The sound of liquid hitting cobblestones is so common that no one reacts. It's the smell that lingers, a sour reminder of how closely life and waste coexist. In the countryside, things are slightly different. You might empty your chamber pot into a compost pile or onto the fields. Farmers aren't squeamish about waste. They see it as fertilizer, a way to return something to the earth. It's all part of the cycle of life, as unromantic as that sounds. In some ways, it's more efficient than what the city folk are doing. Chamber pots are also a strange reflection of social standing. The rich might have them lined with tin or decorated with fine paint, while the poor make do with rough clay or wooden buckets. But at the end of the day, everyone's pot serves the same purpose. No amount of decoration changes that. You glance around the small home where you're spending the night, noting how every corner is used for something practical: cooking, sleeping, storage. There's no extra room for privacy, no separate bathroom. The chamber pot, sitting quietly under a bed, is as close as anyone gets to personal space. It's a small reminder that even the most basic parts of life have to fit into a communal rhythm. As you settle back onto your rough bedding, you can hear distant sounds outside, the creak of a cart, the murmur of voices, maybe a dog barking. Somewhere, someone is emptying a pot into the gutter. It's not a sound you'd ever describe as pleasant, but it's part of the nightly soundtrack of ancient life. You pull the blanket around you and close your eyes, realizing that this simple clay vessel is more than just a tool. It's a symbol of adaptation, of making do, of solving life's most unavoidable problem in the simplest way possible. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And as we'll see, even this humble pot has a surprising story to tell. Morning in Rome is never quiet. The streets are already alive with chatter, the clattering of sandals, and the rhythmic clop of hooves pulling carts piled with goods for the market. But if you follow the crowd just a little further, you'll find an unusual kind of gathering place, the public latrine. And to your surprise, it's not just a place for business. It's a social hub. The first thing you notice is the noise. Laughter, low voices, and the unmistakable hum of conversation echo off the stone walls. It feels less like a bathroom and more like a meeting hall, except with fewer chairs and a lot more holes in the benches. Men sit side by side, exchanging news about politics, the latest gladiator fights, or which merchant is overcharging for olives this week. It's astonishingly casual, as if relieving yourself is just another chance to catch up on community gossip. The Romans never saw the need for privacy here. In fact, they seemed to think the opposite. Why waste the opportunity for conversation? If you're going to sit for a while, you might as well discuss yesterday's chariot race or debate which senator is most corrupt. The benches are lined up without partitions, creating an atmosphere of openness or perhaps forced camaraderie. It's not unusual for strangers to strike up a chat while sitting shoulder to shoulder. So, how about that new aqueduct? Someone might ask while nonchalantly reaching for the communal sponge. It's all a little surreal by modern standards. There's no awkward silence, no anxious waiting for the person in the next stall to finish. Here, there's a kind of comfort in the company. For the Romans, toilets were not places of shame, but part of the rhythm of life. People were used to communal living. After all, bathhouses were shared, meals were shared, even beds were shared in crowded households. Why should this be any different? You take a seat, cautiously, and try to relax. The stone is cold, smooth, and worn down by countless other visitors. Water runs in a shallow channel beneath you, making a soothing, trickling sound that's just enough to mask the occasional, less pleasant noises from the room. Someone nearby is gesturing with their hands as they recount a story, completely unfazed by the fact that everyone is sitting here, well, multitasking. If you listen closely, you can learn a lot from these conversations. It's not just small talk. Sometimes, real business gets done here. Deals are struck, alliances formed, and secrets traded, all while the water keeps flowing beneath the bench. It's a kind of informal networking that you'd never see coming if all you knew of Rome were its grand temples and statues. You wonder how anyone manages to keep a straight face. The whole scene feels almost comedic, but for the Romans, this is normal. They've designed their toilets to hold multiple people at once, because efficiency is everything. Waiting alone, that would be a waste of time. There's also an unexpected sense of community here. For poorer citizens who live in cramped, shared rooms, the public latrine is one of the few places where they can sit down, take a break, and talk to people outside their family. The stone benches are not just for physical relief, but for social relief, too. In a way, this communal setting makes the city feel smaller, more connected. Everyone, from laborers to merchants, passes through here sooner or later. The smell, of course, is still present. No amount of water flow or ventilation can fully remove it. But people don't seem to mind as much as you'd expect. Perhaps they've simply grown used to it, the same way you eventually tune out the background hum of traffic or the drone of a refrigerator. For the Romans, this is just the scent of daily life, as familiar as fresh bread or olive oil. Women, however, had a different experience. Public latrines for women were far fewer and less grand than those for men. Most women relied on chamber pots at home or visited the bathhouses, where some facilities were available. Public spaces, after all, were still largely designed with men in mind. A Roman woman would likely find the idea of chatting in a communal toilet both strange and uncomfortable. Still, the concept of the public latrine wasn't unique to Rome. Other ancient civilizations, like the Greeks, had similar setups, though perhaps with a bit more emphasis on design and aesthetics. In some places, the benches were carved into elegant curves, and the walls decorated with intricate frescoes. Even when it came to toilets, the ancient world never missed a chance to make things beautiful, or at least interesting to look at. As you leave the latrine, you can't help but think about how different it is from the modern bathroom experience. Today, we consider bathrooms deeply private, almost sacred spaces where we escape from the world. But the Romans saw no such divide. To them, sharing this daily ritual wasn't embarrassing. It was just another way of being part of the community. In their minds, the body was nothing to hide, and conversation was always welcome. There's a strange wisdom in that. Life is messy, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it less so. Maybe the Romans were onto something when they turned even their toilets into places of connection. After all, you never know when the next great idea or the latest juicy gossip might come while sitting on a stone bench. The moment you step outside again, the smell hits you. It's everywhere, in the streets, on people's clothes, even in the air you breathe. This is not the kind of city where fresh linen and lavender rule the day. Here, the smell of everyday life is an uninvited companion that follows you everywhere, like a loyal but slightly offensive dog. At first, it's overwhelming. The mixture is complex and layered. There's the sour tang of human waste lingering from the night's chamber pots, the musky scent of livestock, and the sweet, rotting undertone of yesterday's food scraps baking under the sun. Add to that the earthy smoke from cooking fires and the salty smell of sweat from dozens of people crowding the narrow streets, and you've got a fragrance that no perfume could hope to disguise. It's not just a smell, it's a physical presence. You taste it as much as you breathe it. You look around and see how closely life and smell are intertwined here. A butcher's stall hangs cuts of meat that are hours away from going bad, surrounded by a swarm of flies. A fishmonger splashes water on his display, trying to keep the scent of the ocean from turning into the stench of decay. A baker's oven gives off the rich, warm aroma of bread, but even that struggles to rise above the background haze of less appetizing scents. It's a sensory battlefield, and no one's winning. And yet, people barely seem to notice. They go about their business, chatting, laughing, and haggling over prices as though they don't live in a city-sized compost heap. Their noses have adjusted. Maybe yours will too, though for now, every whiff feels like a personal challenge. The reality is that ancient life didn't have the concept of clean that we do today. Sure, there are bathhouses, and people understand the value of washing, but without modern sanitation or plumbing, filth is simply part of existence. The streets double as open drains. Animals walk the same paths as people, leaving their own contributions behind. Waste from homes and workshops all finds its way outside. It's as though the entire city has agreed to live in a shared pile of, well, humanity. If you want to escape the smell, you head uphill. Cities like Rome or Athens often built wealthier neighborhoods on higher ground, partly to catch the breeze and partly to stay clear of the worst of the stench. Down in the crowded lowlands, the smell is magnified by stagnant air and tight alleys where the sun doesn't quite reach. But up on the hills, the breeze is fresher, and the smell is carried away, or at least diluted. It's one of the many perks of being rich. Your house doesn't smell like a public latrine. Inside homes, people do what they can to mask the odors. Herbs are burned, oils are rubbed into the skin, and fragrant flowers are placed in jars to give the illusion of freshness. Some people carry little cloth sachets of aromatic herbs, holding them to their nose when the smell becomes unbearable, the ancient equivalent of walking around with a scented candle. It's a temporary fix, but it's better than nothing. Bathhouses also play a role in this olfactory battle. Romans, in particular, are obsessed with public bathing. For them, it's not just about cleaning the body, but also about escaping the relentless smells of the city. Imagine sinking into a warm pool of water after a day of dodging waste-filled puddles and smoky streets. For a few precious moments, you feel human again. You might even leave with a faint scent of olive oil or herbal soap clinging to your skin, a rare victory over the city's perfume. The smell tells a story too. You can smell the marketplace before you see it, with its blend of spices, fresh bread, and fish. You can tell when someone's been working with animals or tanning leather, a craft that involves soaking hides in substances you'd rather not think about. Even the smell of cooking fires varies by neighborhood. A street with wealthy homes might smell of roasting meat and herbs, while poorer areas smell mostly of porridge, smoke, and desperation. And then there's the smell of people without daily showers or deodorant. The human scent here is strong and honest. It's not necessarily bad, just present. A mixture of sweat, natural oils, and whatever task someone was doing that day. For better or worse, this is what life smells like when there's no plastic-wrapped convenience and no chemical cleaners. It's raw, it's real, and it clings to your clothes like a stubborn memory. You start to notice that the smell isn't just an inconvenience. It shapes how people live. Most activities happen outdoors, where there's at least some circulation of air. Markets, meetings, and even meals often take place in courtyards or open spaces. The home is for sleeping and storage, not for lounging around all day. When the smell builds up indoors, people simply go outside. The streets might be dirty, but at least there's a breeze. After a while, the smell becomes part of the city's personality. It's not pleasant, but it's familiar. It's the smell of bread baking, of horses pulling carts, of sweat and spices, of life happening in all its messy glory. You might never grow to love it, but you can't separate it from the experience of being here. This is what history smells like, a mix of earth, fire, and humanity. And as you move through the streets, you start to wonder if the people of the future will look back at our own world with the same mix of fascination and horror. Maybe they'll marvel at how we cover everything with artificial scents, how we hide every natural odor behind sprays and candles. Maybe they'll find it strange that we can't even imagine a city smelling like this, alive, overwhelming, and unapologetically real. If you want to know what people really ate in ancient times, you don't need a menu or a recipe book. You just need to look, or rather, carefully not look too closely at what ends up in the latrines and sewers. As strange as it sounds, ancient waste is like a time capsule. It tells the truth about diets, habits, and even health without the need for any polite embellishment. Take a walk down to the edge of the city, where the waste channels empty into larger ditches or rivers. If you could peek inside the flow, you'd find a gritty mixture of everything people consumed: seeds, grains, fish bones, fruit pits, and the occasional charred chunk of bread that never made it past someone's teeth. Archaeologists thousands of years from now will actually dig through this with gloves and a strong stomach just to understand how these people lived, and they'll find plenty of clues. Grains dominate the picture, just as they do most ancient diets. Wheat, barley, and millet form the base of every meal. You can see fragments of bread crusts, the husks of barley porridge, and the occasional bit of unground grain that passed through a little too quickly. For the poor, this was life. Bread in the morning, bread at night, and maybe a thin vegetable stew if you were lucky. Meat was a treat, not a staple. Then there are the fish bones. Romans, in particular, loved fish. They salted it, fermented it, turned it into the infamous sauce called garum, and used it the way we might drizzle ketchup or soy sauce over everything. That tangy, salty smell you notice on some streets, that's probably garum being made nearby, a concoction of fish left to rot in the sun until it becomes a rich, salty liquid. Delicious, they claim. Questionable, you might think. Fruit pits are another common find. Figs, dates, grapes, all staples of the ancient pantry. In wealthy households, exotic fruits like pomegranates or imported figs made appearances, leaving behind their tiny, unmistakable seeds. The waste of a rich person tells a different story. More variety, more spices, and more meat. Chicken bones, lamb scraps, even the occasional oyster shell hint at feasts far grander than anything the average citizen would ever see. And it's not just food. The waste also shows the remedies and medicines people used. Seeds from herbs like fennel and coriander turn up often, suggesting they weren't just for flavor, but also for easing digestion. Sometimes odd substances appear, crushed minerals, ash, or strange plant fibers, evidence of the questionable cures people believed would help with stomach ailments or other issues. Ancient medicine, as you might guess, was a mix of wisdom and wild guesses. Interestingly, parasites tell part of the story too. Tiny worm eggs or fragments of tapeworms are often found in old latrines. It's a grim but honest reminder that food hygiene was not exactly a top priority. Meat might be undercooked, water might be contaminated, and washing hands before eating was not always the norm. People lived with constant stomach troubles, something they likely accepted as just part of life. Sometimes, even the objects tossed into toilets reveal a lot about daily life. Broken combs, worn-out sandals, bits of pottery, and even coins have been discovered in ancient waste pits. Imagine accidentally dropping a coin into a Roman latrine. Do you fish it out? Most people probably just said a quiet goodbye and walked away. No coin is worth that kind of retrieval effort. The story of waste is also the story of social class. Poorer neighborhoods show a monotonous diet, grains, a few beans, and the occasional onion or leek. Wealthier homes show diversity, rich meats, honey cakes, and imported spices from across the empire. It's all there, recorded in unflattering detail. History doesn't lie when it's preserved in sewage. The waste also hints at seasonal life. In summer, you find the remnants of fresh fruits and vegetables. In winter, you find more grains, dried fruits, and preserved foods like salted fish or smoked meat. It's a reminder of how tied people were to the rhythms of the seasons. There's no global shipping network to bring strawberries in December or oranges in May. You ate what was available, and your diet changed with the weather. As odd as it sounds, there's a certain honesty to this. Food and waste are universal. They link us all. Every empire, no matter how powerful, leaves behind the same humble evidence of life. It's not the monuments or the temples that tell you how people truly lived. It's what you find in the bottom of an ancient toilet pit, the breadcrumbs of daily existence. You can imagine someone thousands of years from now examining modern waste and being equally fascinated. They'd see traces of coffee, chocolate, processed sugars, and food dyes that probably shouldn't be there. They'd find microplastics too, something future historians will likely shake their heads at, the way we shake ours at Garum. As you leave the edge of the city, you glance back at the ditches and drains that carry all this evidence of life away. To most people, it's just refuse, something to forget. But to anyone paying attention, it's the raw truth of what kept people alive, and sometimes what made them sick. The story of ancient toilets isn't just about how people relieved themselves. It's about how they lived, what they ate, and what they valued, and that, oddly enough, makes it worth remembering. If you think toilets were always crude and unpleasant, take a step inside the private chambers of the elite. The wealthy had a very different experience, one that feels almost shockingly modern compared to what you've seen so far. Welcome to the luxury toilets of the ancient world, where even something as ordinary as relieving yourself could be wrapped in a cloak of sophistication and social standing. The first thing you notice is the material. Forget rough wooden seats or cold stone benches. Here, the toilet might be carved from smooth marble, cooled to the touch and polished until it gleams. The wealthy knew that everything in their homes, from dining tables to toilets, needed to make a statement. Why should the most private corner of the house be any less elegant? If guests ever wandered into these areas, the design would quietly announce, "Yes, even here, we have taste." Some of these private facilities even had intricate mosaics beneath your feet. Imagine taking a seat and looking down to see a carefully arranged pattern of colorful tiles depicting dolphins, flowers, or scenes from mythology. It's a surreal mix of high art and low function, as if the floor itself is trying to distract you from what's happening above it. You might even find painted walls, oil lamps set into decorative niches, and bronze fixtures designed to hold water jars or towels. These weren't just toilets, they were miniature rooms of refinement. And then there's the matter of water. Unlike the communal latrines, which depended on public infrastructure, wealthy homes often had their own private channels for water flow. Small cisterns or aqueduct extensions would ensure a steady stream of water, both to rinse away waste and to keep the room smelling fresher than the average Roman street, which, admittedly, wasn't hard to beat. You might even hear the quiet trickle of water nearby, a sound that feels oddly luxurious when you consider what it's meant to hide. Servants, of course, played a big role in maintaining these spaces. Someone had to ensure the water channels stayed clear, the sponges or cloths were clean, and the room itself was free of lingering odors. For the elite, this was simply a given. Why dirty your own hands when someone else could handle the less glamorous parts of life? It's easy to forget, standing in such a room, that for most people outside these walls, a bucket or a public bench was the only option. The contrast between rich and poor is striking. While a merchant or senator might relieve himself in a private marble room with scented oils, the average citizen is still walking through mud and waste in the streets, waiting for an empty spot in a noisy public latrine. It's not just about comfort, it's about dignity. To have a private toilet in your home is to say that your life, your time, and even your waste are worth special treatment. Interestingly, luxury toilets were not limited to homes. In some cases, grand villas and public buildings, like palaces or temples, had private facilities reserved for important guests. These toilets might feature lavish designs, cushioned seating. Imagine sitting on a padded surface in a world where most people sit on cold stone, and even attendants waiting nearby to hand you fresh cloths or scented oils. It's a level of service that would put some modern spas to shame. In wealthier households, privacy was also more respected. While public latrines were communal, private ones often had small wooden doors or curtains, separating them from the rest of the house. It wasn't perfect. Servants were still likely to be nearby, but it was a world apart from the shoulder-to-shoulder chatter of the public facilities. You can imagine the relief of having a few quiet minutes, free from the noise of the marketplace or the constant hum of the streets outside. Of course, luxury often comes with superstition. Some wealthy Romans believed that evil spirits could lurk in bathrooms, especially near the drains. To ward them off, they decorated these rooms with protective symbols, carved faces, or small statues of household gods. It sounds odd, but when you think about it, it makes sense. A private toilet was a place of vulnerability. Better to be on the safe side. You take a moment to sit on one of these marble seats, and it's a strange experience. It's cool at first, almost shockingly so, but smooth and surprisingly comfortable. You can imagine someone sitting here in their fine tunic, taking their time, maybe even contemplating the day ahead. A servant might knock softly on the door, asking if you need water or fresh linens. It's not a world you associate with toilets, but here it is, clean, quiet, and strangely elegant. These luxury setups tell you something important about ancient life. For the wealthy, even the smallest details mattered. Comfort was a sign of power, and so was the ability to separate yourself from the everyday mess of the city. A private toilet wasn't just about hygiene, it was about social standing, a small but unmistakable reminder that you were above the chaos outside your villa walls. As you step back into the sunlight, you can't help but think about how different this experience is from that of the average person. The contrast is almost unfair, but then again, history has always been like that. The rich live one way, the poor another. And yet, no matter how beautiful or decorated a toilet might be, the basic reality remains the same. The marble, the mosaics, the scented oils, they all exist to disguise the most universal truth of all. Everyone, no matter how powerful, needs a place to go. Leave the bustling city behind, and the world of toilets changes dramatically. Out in the countryside, life is simpler, rougher, and far less glamorous. There are no marble seats, no running water, no carefully carved mosaics. Here, a toilet is often nothing more than a shallow pit in the ground, surrounded by a few wooden planks for stability, or perhaps just a patch of earth behind a barn. Privacy is a luxury, and comfort is optional. You start your morning in a small rural village, and the first thing you notice is the quiet. There's no constant rumble of carts or shouting merchants, just the sound of birds, the wind in the trees, and maybe the distant bleating of sheep. It's peaceful until you remember that when nature calls, your only option might be squatting behind a hedge while hoping the neighbor's goats don't wander over to investigate. Farmers, in particular, are practical about these things. Waste isn't just waste here, it's fertilizer. In many rural communities, people collect human waste, mix it with animal manure, and return it to the fields to help grow crops. It's a cycle as old as farming itself, and no one's squeamish about it. In fact, the concept of wasting waste would seem ridiculous. Why throw something away when it can help feed next year's harvest? The tools and methods reflect this no-nonsense approach. Wooden buckets, clay jars, or even old baskets lined with straw might serve as nighttime chamber pots. By morning, someone carries them outside to dump into a compost pit or directly onto a field. The smell is unmistakable, but in a village surrounded by animals, it doesn't seem as shocking as it would in a city. Everyone's nose is already trained to ignore the pungent perfume of cows, pigs, and chickens. There's also a kind of freedom in the countryside. If you need to relieve yourself during the day, you don't have to line up for a public bench or wait for a servant to clean the pot. You simply walk out to the edge of a field or down by the river and find a quiet spot. The trees don't judge you. The sky doesn't care. It's not comfortable, but it's quick. And sometimes that's all that matters. Still, rural toilets are not without hazards. There's no neatly paved floor or carefully placed stone seat. A muddy bank or a patch of grass can be treacherous, especially in bad weather. One wrong step and you're regretting everything. And if you're unlucky enough to live near a dense forest, there's always the chance of meeting a curious wild animal mid-squat. Nothing ruins your morning like a startled deer charging past. In colder regions, the experience is even less pleasant. Imagine stepping outside in the middle of winter, the ground frozen solid, the wind cutting through your clothes. You crouch in the snow, your breath turning into white clouds, and suddenly, a handful of snow becomes the world's chillest toilet paper. It's enough to make you miss the shared sponge of a Roman latrine, almost. Despite these challenges, rural toilets have one major advantage over city setups. They're cleaner. With fewer people and wide open spaces, waste doesn't build up in the same way. There are no overflowing buckets waiting to be dumped into crowded streets, no stagnant puddles breeding disease. Fresh air takes care of the worst of the smell, and the earth itself does the rest. It's not luxurious, but it's surprisingly practical. For wealthier farmers or small landowners, things might be slightly better. Some rural homes have simple wooden outhouses, little huts built over pits, often with a hole cut into a bench-like seat. It's a step up from the open field, but not by much. These outhouses are dark, drafty, and always a little unsettling. You never know what's lurking in the shadows, waiting for a quiet moment to scurry across your foot. Spiders seem to have claimed rural toilets as their kingdom. Even in these conditions, people find ways to make the experience tolerable. Some line the seat with straw for warmth. Others hang bunches of herbs inside to mask the smell, lavender, rosemary, or whatever happens to grow nearby. It doesn't eliminate the odor, but it gives you something else to focus on. Little touches like these remind you that even in the simplest lives, people crave a bit of comfort. The rhythm of rural life means that people rarely dwell on these details. Toilets are just another part of the day, like milking the cow or fetching water from the well. Children grow up learning exactly which tree or fence postmarks the bathroom area, and no one makes a fuss about it. There's no embarrassment here, just necessity. After all, when you live this close to the land, you understand that everything returns to the earth eventually. As you look out over the fields, the rising sun turning the horizon golden, you realize something. For all its lack of sophistication, the countryside feels more connected to nature, more in tune with the cycles of life. There's no illusion of separation between people and the land. The toilet, or lack of one, is just part of that connection. You take a deep breath, carefully, depending on where you're standing, and appreciate the simplicity. There are no marble seats here, no communal gossip benches, no buckets being tossed out of windows, just open air, a patch of ground, and a practical approach to life's most universal need. When the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows stretch across the ground, people in the ancient world begin to feel a quiet unease. Night brings more than darkness. It brings superstition, and oddly enough, toilets are one of the places where these fears take root. For many, the act of relieving oneself wasn't just a physical necessity, it was a moment of vulnerability, one where you might attract unwanted attention from spirits, curses, or even malicious gods. It might sound strange now, but imagine crouching over a dark pit or a simple hole in the ground at night, with only the moonlight and the rustling of animals around you. The air feels heavy, the silence broken only by the creak of wood or the snap of a twig. It's easy to feel exposed. Ancient people didn't have electric lights or sturdy locks. A toilet, whether a field, a chamber pot, or a public latrine, could feel like a doorway to something unknown. In Rome, for example, there were whispers of toilet demons. Yes, you heard that correctly. People believed that spirits might lurk in the drains, waiting to strike when someone was least expecting it. One legend tells of a snake or rat spirit living in the sewer, ready to bite anyone who wasn't careful. To ward off such dangers, some latrines were decorated with small carved faces of household gods or symbols meant to keep evil at bay. Imagine squatting while staring at a stern little clay mask glaring back at you, both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The Greeks had similar anxieties. They believed that toilets were places where the boundary between the human world and the underworld was thinner. It wasn't unheard of for people to mutter protective charms or even spit 3 times before sitting down, just to make sure no wandering spirit took offense. Some households placed talismans near their latrines, tiny offerings of bread or herbs to keep bad luck away. It sounds a bit absurd until you remember how powerless people often felt against illness, accidents, and the unknown. Better safe than sorry. In rural villages, the fears took on a different form. Going outside at night was risky enough without thinking about spirits. Wolves, wild dogs, or even a lurking thief could be waiting in the shadows. The outhouse, if you had one, was usually far from the main house, a lonely little shack in the dark. It creaked in the wind, its wooden planks barely holding back the chill. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, made the experience feel like a small test of courage. Some people avoided the nighttime trek altogether by using chamber pots indoors. Even then, they might whisper a quick prayer, asking their ancestors to keep watch. Toilets, after all, were seen as places of impurity, not just physically, but spiritually. They were connected to waste, to decay, to the unclean parts of life. And where there is filth, people imagined there might also be dark forces. Other superstitions were tied to timing. In some cultures, it was considered unlucky to relieve oneself at certain hours of the night, especially near midnight, when spirits were thought to roam more freely. Children were warned not to wander near outdoor pits or rivers after dark, not just because of animals, but because something might grab them. It's not hard to see how these stories started. A mix of caution, fear, and the eerie feeling of being alone in the dark. There were also strange rules about what could or couldn't be thrown into latrines. Some believed that tossing certain objects, like sharp bones or broken pottery, would anger the spirits of the earth. Others thought that keeping charms or protective herbs near the latrine could prevent bad luck. It's a mix of sanitation and superstition, where practicality and belief intertwine in curious ways. The wealthy weren't immune to these fears either. Even in their marble-seated private bathrooms, they might burn incense or hang charms to keep the room pure. Some Roman homes featured small altars near the toilet, where offerings of wine or grain could be made to the household gods before using the facilities. It's an odd thought, but it shows how deeply spiritual life was woven into every aspect of daily routine. Looking at it now, you can almost understand why toilets became places of superstition. They were dark, isolated, and sometimes dangerous. Without modern plumbing or lighting, they felt mysterious, places where anything could happen. And in a world where illness spread easily and people didn't understand germs, it was easier to blame bad spirits for sickness than to suspect that a dirty latrine was the culprit. As you sit quietly on a wooden bench, a small breeze sneaks through the cracks, carrying with it the distant sounds of the night, a dog barking, someone calling out, the faint rush of water in a nearby ditch. You imagine what it would feel like to be here, alone, with only a faint lamp or a flickering candle. It's not hard to see why someone might feel the need to whisper a prayer or hold on to a lucky charm. It's not just about fear of spirits. It's about the uneasy knowledge that this is one of the few moments in life where you're truly vulnerable. You step out of the small hut and into the cool night air, relieved not just physically, but emotionally. The stars above are sharp and bright, unspoiled by city smoke or light. It's a reminder that even in the simplest, strangest, or most uncomfortable parts of daily life, people have always looked for meaning, protection, and a bit of reassurance, even if that meant hanging a talisman in the toilet. Cleanliness is a concept that has changed more than almost anything else over the centuries. Today, we think of it as an absolute. Showers every morning, toilets that flush with the push of a button, soaps that smell like lavender fields. But in the ancient world, cleanliness was a shifting target. People didn't aim for perfection, they aimed for good enough. And when you consider the conditions they lived in, that was already an achievement. The shift toward what we'd call proper sanitation happened slowly and unevenly. In some ways, the Romans were ahead of their time. They built aqueducts, baths, and sewers that moved waste away from their streets. If you lived in Rome, you might actually feel proud of your city's infrastructure. You could visit a public bathhouse, scrub yourself with olive oil and estrigil, and walk away feeling, by ancient standards, sparkling clean. But what about outside these big cities? Life was still muddy, smelly, and coated with a layer of what could best be described as living dust. Most people didn't bathe daily. In rural areas, a bath might be a quick dip in a cold river, or a rinse with a bucket of water poured over your head, maybe once a week. Soap, as we know it, wasn't common. Instead, people used sand, ash, or even flour to scrub themselves. It sounds bizarre, but these rough substances helped scrape off dirt and sweat. And for the wealthy, olive oil did double duty as both moisturizer and cleaning tool. You'd rub it on, then scrape it off, along with whatever grime stuck to your skin. Think of it as the original spa treatment, minus the cucumber slices for your eyes. Toilets, too, were part of this slow evolution of hygiene. Public latrines and private setups were steps toward keeping waste contained and moving it away from living spaces. Before these systems existed, people simply used the nearest patch of ground or tossed their waste outside. Imagine an entire city doing that with no drainage or organization. The smell alone would make your eyes water. The Roman sewers, crude as they seem now, were revolutionary in their time. Still, germs and disease were constant threats. People didn't understand bacteria, but they noticed that illness spread faster in dirty conditions. They spoke of bad air, believing that foul smells caused sickness. While they weren't completely wrong, bad sanitation does lead to disease. They didn't know that the culprit was microscopic. As a result, their solutions often involved perfumes and incense to mask odors, rather than actually removing the source of the problem. Bathhouses became essential, especially in cities like Rome. They were more than just places to wash. They were social centers. You'd come in, strip down, and move through a series of rooms, hot, warm, and cold, before emerging relatively clean. But here's the twist. Bathhouses shared water among everyone. If you think public pools are questionable today, imagine sitting in a large tub with dozens of strangers who just came straight from the streets and latrines. By the end of the day, the water was, let's just say, well used. In medieval Europe, things actually took a step backward. After the fall of Rome, much of its sanitation infrastructure fell into disrepair. People went back to using buckets and ditches, and bathing became rare. In fact, some believed that too much washing was unhealthy, that it opened the pores and made you vulnerable to disease. As strange as it sounds, there were wealthy nobles who would wear the same clothes for weeks, simply layering perfumes to cover the smell. Cleanliness became more about appearances than actual hygiene. But even in these grimy centuries, progress crept forward. Cities started experimenting with cesspits, trenches, and designated waste areas. It wasn't glamorous, but it helped keep streets passable and somewhat less hazardous. Night soil collectors, yes, that's exactly what it sounds like, would haul away human waste in the dead of night, dumping it outside city walls or selling it as fertilizer. It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. What's fascinating is how people adapted. In the absence of constant cleanliness, they developed strong noses and even stronger stomachs. They accepted that life was messy, smelly, and unpredictable. They used herbs like rosemary, thyme, or mint, not just for cooking, but for masking unpleasant scents on their hands or clothes. Some carried small pomanders, little balls filled with fragrant spices, which they'd sniff when walking through especially foul areas. It was the medieval version of holding a handkerchief over your nose. Looking at this now, you can't help but feel a mix of gratitude and admiration. Gratitude for the modern luxuries of flushing toilets, soap, and clean running water. Admiration for how resilient people were when they had none of these things. They didn't crumble under the weight of filth. They simply worked around it, inventing small rituals of cleanliness where they could. By the time you splash some water on your hands or rinse your face in a shallow basin, you realize how precious even a little bit of cleanliness feels in this world. The cool water wakes you up, washing away not just the dust on your skin, but the lingering heaviness of the smells outside. It's a reminder that every small act of hygiene, whether it's a quick wash or an herbal rinse, was a victory in a time when life was much dirtier and far less forgiving. Toilets may seem like great equalizers. After all, everyone needs them, but in the ancient world, they were often symbols of class and privilege. The differences between a peasant's experience and that of a wealthy merchant or noble could be as stark as night and day. If you wanted to know someone's social standing, you didn't need to look at their clothes or their home. Sometimes, you only had to see where and how they went to the bathroom. For the poor, the toilet was often no more than a bucket, a pit, or an open field. There was no expectation of privacy, no seat carved from smooth stone, no clever drainage system to whisk things away. Waste was something you dealt with directly, usually by dumping it in the street or a nearby ditch. And if you were unlucky enough to live in a crowded neighborhood, you might be sharing a single wooden bucket with multiple families. The smell, the flies, and the discomfort were just part of the daily grind. No one thought it odd. It was all they'd ever known. By contrast, the wealthy enjoyed a level of comfort that must have seemed almost magical to those on the outside. A rich Roman's home, for example, could have a private latrine, complete with running water and a polished marble seat. Imagine the luxury of not having to sit shoulder choosily with strangers in a public latrine. Imagine the luxury of not having to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a public latrine. Stumble outside in the dark with a chamber pot. For the elite, using the toilet could be a solitary, even leisurely affair. Some might even take their time, using the quiet moment to read, think, or plan their day. The materials used told a story of social standing too. While the poor made do with rough wooden boards, or nothing at all, the rich had carefully designed facilities, bronze fittings, mosaics, and decorative tiles. Even their cleaning tools were better. Instead of sharing a communal sponge on a stick, they might have personal cloths, which were washed by servants, and sometimes scented with herbs. These little details spoke volumes about who mattered in society and who didn't. Public latrines themselves reflected this divide. In cities like Rome, some were well maintained, with flowing water and benches made of smooth stone, but these were typically located in wealthier districts. In the poorer neighborhoods, the facilities were fewer, dirtier, and far less comfortable. If you were a laborer or slave, you couldn't simply wander into the fanciest latrine and take a seat. Those places were often guarded or restricted, meant for citizens or paying customers. In some cultures, toilets weren't just functional, but symbolic. In Japan, for instance, wealthy households in later centuries sometimes built toilets with beautiful wooden architecture and even gardens visible through small openings, a way of turning something mundane into an experience. Meanwhile, peasants squatted over holes in the ground, surrounded by mud and the buzzing of flies. The contrast couldn't be greater. But the divide wasn't just about physical comfort, it was also about health. Wealthier families, with their better facilities and cleaner water, were less likely to suffer from diseases spread by poor sanitation. For the lower classes, outbreaks of illness were a constant threat, made worse by the filth in their streets and the lack of proper waste disposal. A simple act like washing after using the toilet, something that might be possible for the wealthy, was often a luxury for the poor, who might not have clean water to spare. The treatment of servants and slaves also highlights these differences. Many wealthy homes had specific slaves assigned to maintain latrines, empty chamber pots, and clean the facilities. It was a degrading job, but someone had to do it. In some cases, slaves were even expected to stand by during their master's use of the toilet, ready to offer a sponge, water, or towels. It was an intimate kind of servitude that underscored just how much social standing shaped every corner of life. There were also unspoken rules about who could relieve themselves where. In rural villages, the poor often used the edges of fields or shared pits, while the landowners had private outhouses or better-built facilities. In cities, wealthier citizens had access to cleaner, more maintained public latrines, while the rest were left with whatever was available. Class determined not just the quality of your meals or your clothing, but even the basic dignity of answering nature's call. And yet, despite these differences, the act itself was universal. No matter how rich or powerful someone was, they still needed the same daily break that everyone else did. A senator in Rome and a farmer on the outskirts of the empire shared this one unavoidable truth. Perhaps that's why some communal latrines, especially in marketplaces, saw people from all walks of life sitting side by side, at least for a brief moment. It was a rare kind of equality, though often unspoken. As you think about it, you realize how much toilets tell us about ancient society. They reveal who had access to water, who could afford privacy, and who had the power to avoid the mess of the streets. They show the divide between the lives of the privileged and the struggles of everyone else. A marble seat wasn't just comfortable, it was a statement of wealth, social standing, and even political influence. You step back into the sunlight and glance at the bustling city around you. Somewhere, a wealthy merchant is sitting on a marble bench, surrounded by mosaics and scented oils. Somewhere else, a laborer is crouched over a wooden bucket in a dark alley. And yet, both of them, for a brief and humbling moment, are doing the exact same thing. The final steps of this journey bring us to the present, a world where toilets are so advanced, so comfortable, and so commonplace that we rarely give them a second thought. But when you look back at the centuries of filth, improvisation, and communal sponges that came before, modern bathrooms start to feel like small miracles. Flush toilets, for instance, would have seemed like sorcery to the ancients. Press a handle and everything vanishes in a swirl of clean water. There's no bucket to empty, no pit to cover, no sponge to rinse. The smell is contained, the waste is whisked away through hidden pipes, and you don't even have to think about where it goes. It's all invisible, a luxury so seamless we barely notice it. Compared to the shared benches of a Roman latrine or the icy squats in a rural field, it's a leap that borders on absurdity. Even the idea of privacy would shock our ancestors. Today, a bathroom is a personal sanctuary. We close the door, sometimes even lock it, and we expect those moments to be entirely our own. For most of history, this would have been unthinkable. The ancient world did not separate bodily functions from social life in the way we do now. They would find our obsession with privacy both strange and maybe a little amusing. Why hide? A Roman might ask, while leaning on his marble bench, chatting about politics with the guy next to him. Toilet paper is another modern marvel, soft, clean, and disposable. It's a far cry from moss, sticks, or shared sponges. While the Chinese were the first to experiment with paper for this purpose, it didn't become widespread in the West until much later. Before that, even the wealthy relied on cloth or water. Today, the very idea of using anything less than pristine, factory-made tissue seems unimaginable. Yet for most of history, people would have happily traded their best tunic for something that didn't involve a rough leaf. Modern sanitation doesn't just make life more comfortable, it saves lives. Clean water and proper waste disposal have done more to prevent disease than almost any medical advancement. When you think about it, entire ancient cities were ticking health hazards, rivers polluted with waste, streets full of refuse, and no understanding of germs. The outbreaks that devastated populations back then would be almost unthinkable today, thanks in part to something as humble as a working sewer system. Still, it's strange how little we think about this. We don't look at a porcelain toilet and feel awe at the centuries of trial, error, and human discomfort that led to its creation. We don't admire the silent pipes under our homes or the constant flow of clean water. These things have become invisible luxuries, but history reminds us that it wasn't always this way. Every modern bathroom is the result of countless forgotten ideas, from the first Roman sewers to the careful experiments of engineers and inventors who wanted to make life just a little cleaner. What's even more fascinating is how toilets remain tied to culture. In some countries today, water-based cleaning is preferred over paper, echoing ancient practices from the Middle East or India. In others, high-tech toilets with heated seats, music, and built-in bidets turn the bathroom into a miniature spa. The logical extreme of what the Roman elite started with, their marble benches and mosaics. It's proof that even something as universal as a toilet can evolve into an art form. You can't help but laugh a little at how far we've come. The thought of shouting something and then tossing a chamber pot into the street feels like something out of a nightmare. The image of sitting in a row of strangers, passing around a vinegar-soaked sponge, is even worse. And yet, these were once the height of progress. People were proud of these systems. They were steps forward, even if they seem horrifying now. As you reflect on everything you've seen, from muddy rural pits to marble-seated luxury, it becomes clear that toilets are not just about waste. They're about who we are, how we live, and what we value. They tell the story of our ingenuity, our stubbornness, and our constant desire to make even the least glamorous parts of life a little easier. You take a final walk through the ancient streets, now glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. The smells are still there, the noise still rattling around the narrow alleys. But there's something almost charming about it all. This is where it began, the messy, unfiltered reality of daily life. And while you're probably grateful to leave it behind, you can't help but respect the people who made it work. History, after all, is not just written in temples and scrolls. Sometimes, it's carved into a stone bench or buried at the bottom of a forgotten latrine. And now, with every flush, we carry that story forward, whether we think about it or not. You've wandered through the winding streets of the past, seen the stone benches of Rome, the humble chamber pots, and the rough, windswept fields of rural life. You've watched the centuries of ingenuity, discomfort, and quiet determination that shaped something as simple as the toilet. Something so ordinary, yet so telling about the lives of those who came before us. And now, it's time to let the images fade, to step out of the noise and smells of the past, and into a calmer place, where the only thing you need to do is breathe. Take a slow breath in. Imagine the cool air of an ancient bathhouse, quiet after the crowd has gone, the warm stone floor beneath your feet, the faint sound of water trickling in the distance, and the soft light of flickering oil lamps. Exhale and let the last traces of the day's journey slip away like water running down a smooth marble channel. Another breath, even slower this time. Picture yourself walking through a quiet Roman villa garden at dusk. The orange glow of the sunset paints everything in gold. Olive trees sway gently in the evening breeze, and the air smells faintly of earth and herbs, rosemary, thyme, maybe a hint of fresh bread from the kitchen. With each step, the past feels softer, less sharp, until it's just a whisper. As you lie still now, the centuries of history feel far away, like distant waves on a calm sea. You've seen the unpolished, human side of life, the part that never makes it into heroic tales, but matters all the same. There's nothing to do now but let your mind settle, like a quiet house after everyone's asleep. Close your eyes, let the cool night breeze of history fade to nothing. You are safe, warm, and still. There's no noise, no crowd, no city smell, just the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. Sleep well and good night.